80 years ago, the United States developed and used two nuclear weapons against the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hundreds of thousands died, but billions were condemned to live under constant threat of global annihilation. A near century later, every man, woman, and child on the planet is still living under the shadow of the mushroom cloud. The Americans might have effectively ended humanity's most brutal war, but in the process they opened a Pandora's box that could never be closed. A weapon that no serious contender could afford to ignore. A force so devastating that it forged a new world order. Just months after the bomb was dropped, a newly formed United Nations would call for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. But that would not come to pass. Instead, the bomb would become globalized, and a doctrine of mutually assured destruction would supersede any hope for denuclearization. The widespread adoption of the bomb among superpowers would parallel the start of the Cold War, coloring the decades-long conflict with a bleak and existential dread. Several close calls happened during this conflict alone, pivotal moments where one person's decisions saved the world from total annihilation. A policy of containment became the norm, and in theory it made sense. The less countries with nuclear weapons, the less likely any country is to use them. What the policy failed to account for was that some nations would happily trade international credibility for a weapon of mass destruction. Every single day that one of the world's over 12,000 nuclear weapons is not launched, a small miracle. Every conflict, a spark that could trigger a chain reaction which ends the world as we know it. Over the course of this video, I will attempt to explain the highest stake game in the world and the history that brought us to the brink. But be warned, once you start seeing the world through an atomic lens, you may never see it the same way again.
680 to 90, 10-4.
Although several nations collaborated to defeat Germany and Imperial Japan, it was far from a unified front. Decaying European empires were caught between two emerging giants, the United States and the Soviet Union. The global situation was unstable, and everyone knew that a lasting peace was improbable. If the Soviets wanted any hope of achieving parity with the Americans, they would have to develop their own superweapon. And so they did. In 1949, the Soviets would detonate their first atomic weapon over the steppes of Kazakhstan, ending the American monopoly on nuclear force and plunging the world into an arms race. Both the Soviets and Americans would spend the next few decades expanding their nuclear arsenals to almost comical proportions. Enough firepower to end the world was not enough. Each nation wanted enough firepower to end the world several times over. The United Kingdom was the next state to successfully detonate a nuclear weapon, doing so off the coast of Australia in 1952. The test cemented the UK, a declining empire and staunch American ally, as the world's third nuclear-armed power. In 1960, France became the fourth country to attain nuclear firepower, following a test detonation in its colonial territory of Algeria. What had started as a two-party standoff was rapidly evolving into something far more unpredictable and harder to control. China would be the fifth nation to develop the bomb, doing so in 1964, just 3 years after their ideological and strategic split with the Soviet Union. Within just 2 decades of the United Nations Security Council's founding, all 5 of its permanent members had gained access to a destructive capability that would have seemed unimaginable at the dawn of the 20th century. Around this time, the international community attempted to put some rules around this madness. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, was introduced in 1968 with 3 main goals: stop the spread of nuclear weapons, promote gradual disarmament, and ensure peaceful access to nuclear energy. It sounded good on paper, but like most treaties, its power depends entirely on who chooses to follow it. In the decades that followed, several other nations would seek to develop, and in some cases conceal, their own atomic capacity. The first of these states is Israel, perhaps the most opaque of the rogue actors. The Israeli government maintains a strict policy of strategic ambiguity, refusing to confirm or deny the existence of its nuclear arsenal. But the evidence is compelling. Multiple whistleblowers, including former nuclear technician Mordechai Vanunu, have claimed that Israel not only possesses nuclear weapons, but has had them for decades. Israel has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and international inspectors have never been granted full access to its suspected sites. Its silence speaks volumes, and that silence is by design. Ambiguity, in this case, is a strategy. The threat is implied, but never declared. South Africa would be the next state to pursue nuclear weapons, developing a small arsenal under its apartheid regime. During the transition to a democratic government in the early 90s, South Africa would surrender their arsenal, making them the only country to ever develop and then give up the bomb. India would be the next rogue actor, conducting a nuclear test codenamed Smiling Buddha in 1974. Although India would claim this test was for peaceful purposes, it faced intense international scrutiny and condemnation. It also triggered a regional arms race, which led directly to the nuclearization of Pakistan in 1998. The last country to develop and maintain a nuclear arsenal is North Korea, which withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003 and is believed to have successfully conducted their first nuclear weapon test in 2006. These are just the nations that have built their own arsenals. Several other countries have possessed nuclear weapons at some point, either as a host nation for a foreign power or due to geopolitical fallout, such as the collapse of the Soviet Union. I haven't included these cases here, because these countries either quickly relinquished control or never had operational authority over the weapons stationed within their borders. Still, their existence is crucial to understanding the fragile and often overlooked realities of a nuclear world. There have been several near-atomic exchanges, some of which could have led to death tolls in the hundreds of millions, and the complete erasure of entire countries. One of the most dramatic incidents took place at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Tensions were at a boiling point, and the United States had sent a fleet to enforce a naval blockade on Cuba. One of the Soviet submarines, armed with nuclear torpedoes, descended into the depths of the ocean to avoid detection by American forces. The Americans, unaware the vessel hosted a nuclear weapon, began dropping fake depth charges in an effort to get the submarine to surface. The submarine captain, having no line to Moscow and not knowing the charges were duds, assumed a full-scale war had broken out between NATO and the Eastern Bloc. The Soviets had a system which required the consent of 3 officers to authorize launch. One of these officers was the captain, the other a political officer, and the third the flotilla commander and second in command of the submarine, a man named Vasily Arkhipov. The captain and political officer both authorized the launch. The lone voice against it was Arkhipov, who insisted they had no clear indication of a full-scale war. Had Arkhipov authorized the launch, it is possible a global nuclear exchange may have happened. One man, one decision, the world as we know it might owe its survival to Vasily Arkhipov. Another near-apocalypse came in 1979, when U.S. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski was jolted awake at 3 a.m. with a chilling report. 250 Soviet missiles were en route to the United States. As Brzezinski prepared to call the president and initiate a retaliatory strike, a second call came through. It was a false alarm. A training tape had been mistakenly inserted into NORAD's early warning system, simulating a Soviet launch. Had that second call come even moments later, the Cold War might have not ended in a treaty, but in a fire, a mutual obliteration, all of that based on a glitch. These are just 2 examples of near misses from a frighteningly long list. The point I'm trying to make is even though mutually assured destruction might be a strong deterrent against nuclear war, it is hardly a 100% guarantee. With the stabilization brought upon by American hegemony, the possibility of nuclear warfare has seemed to subside from the forefront of the popular imagination. But those who have seen my last video will know that I do not think American global hegemony is going to last forever. And even if it did, everyone is under someone's nuclear umbrella, whether it is outright stated or merely implied. This makes any conflict a potential nuclear one. New types of nuclear applications and arms such as tactical nukes have also been experimented with. If one of these weapons were to make their way onto the front lines, it would open a serious discourse about appropriate response. If Russia used a tactical nuke on a Ukrainian military base, NATO might feel emboldened to use one in Crimea. This leads to a situation where an escalation of conventional warfare leads to a point where nuclear weapons are being used, small enough to be seen as usable, deadly enough to unleash global escalation. Once nuclear is baseline, the deployment of strategic nukes is within reach. Any wrong move or miscommunication could lead to a generalized first strike. One area where I see the usage of tactical nuclear weapons as particularly likely is South Asia. India and Pakistan have been locked in conflict since their inception, and Pakistani nuclear doctrine doesn't rule out a first strike. We saw in the recent exchange between Pakistan and India how quickly conflict can escalate between the two. If one of the countries decided to use any sort of atomic armament on the other, it could result in a full-scale nuclear war. Another new technology is hypersonic missiles. First deployed in the Russia-Ukraine war and recently used in the emerging conflict between Israel and Iran, these missiles are much harder to intercept due to their pure speed. If these missiles were ever equipped with a nuclear warhead, even the most sophisticated of current interception systems would have trouble stopping them. The Israel-Iran war is also a potential flashpoint for atomic exchange. Although Iran does not have nuclear weapons, they are threatening to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and are believed to have the technological capacity to construct them. Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement and is widely believed to have strategic nuclear weapons. According to high-level Iranian officials, Pakistan would be willing to retaliate on behalf of Iran if Israel were to use a nuclear weapon. Add to this the interest of three great powers, and the very real possibility of American entry into the war, and you have a flashpoint for potential nuclear exchange. Any great power conflict, such as the one currently happening in Ukraine, or a potential one in Taiwan or the South China Sea, lends itself well to misinterpretation, overreaction, or miscommunication. So how could a nation defend themselves? America appears to be attempting an answer by greenlighting a missile defense system theoretically capable of intercepting a significant number of ballistic missiles. If the so-called Golden Dome is operationally successful, this could create a world in which powers with access to the right technology and infrastructure feel emboldened to launch a first strike. Paradoxically, a good defense could make the world more unsafe by removing the mutually assured from mutually assured destruction. We began this story in the shadow of a mushroom cloud. 80 years later, and we are still living in it. 12,000 nuclear weapons sit under the command of fallible men and women operating within fragile systems. It may be a miracle that none have been used yet, but a miracle is not a strategy. A relative peace held together by terror is not sustainable. Chance and restraint are not a powerful enough adhesive to keep a warming world intact. The bomb may have brought a swift end to humanity's most brutal war. Now it threatens a swift end to humanity itself. And if history is any precedent, that end will come, whether it's due to a glitch, human error, or the same kind of hubris that led us to develop such destructive weapons in the first place. Ideally, global tensions will chill, communications between nations will become more transparent, and denuclearization will become universal. Maybe that world can exist, but until it does, we're all living on borrowed time. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and comment what you'd like to see me cover next.